The galaxy was on edge. For years, Earth and the Empire had been locked in a tense standoff. Skirmishes erupted along their shared borders, and mistrust grew like a shadow over both civilizations. But now, after months of careful planning, representatives from both sides were finally meeting aboard Orbital Harmony, a neutral space station floating silently between stars. This summit was supposed to bring peace, or at least prevent an all-out war. Laura stood outside the conference hall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a neatly pressed suit, its dark blue fabric chosen specifically for its diplomatic tone. Her hair was pulled back into a professional bun, though a few stray strands escaped, framing her face. Laura had spent years preparing for moments like this, but today felt different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. Behind her shuffled nervously. He was younger than Laura by nearly a decade, with short brown hair and glasses that always seemed slightly askew. Adjusted the strap of his leather satchel, which held the most important document of his career, the Galactic Peace Treaty. Printed on edible paper as a gesture of goodwill, it symbolized humanity's hope for reconciliation with the. Inside the conference room, Ambassador L waited patiently. His chitinous exoskeleton shimmered faintly under the artificial lights, reflecting shades of green and gold. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, L's presence commanded attention. His forearms rested at his sides, each tipped with delicate claws that clicked softly against the floor. Though his expression was unreadable behind his features, his posture suggested calm authority. "Are you ready?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "As ready as I'll ever be," Laura replied, forcing a smile. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and pushed open the heavy doors. The room fell silent as Laura entered. L turned to face them, his large, compound eyes scanning the newcomers carefully. Behind him, 2 guards stood motionless, their weapons holstered but clearly visible. The air felt thick with anticipation. "Welcome, Ambassador," L said, his words translated into smooth, clipped English through a device embedded in his chest. "We have awaited your arrival." "Thank you, Ambassador L," Laura responded, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. "I trust the journey here was uneventful." "It was," L replied, "and yours?" "Uneventful as well," Laura lied. In truth, the trip had been anything but. A small ferret-like creature named Max, Laura's beloved pet, had managed to stow away its bag during the voyage. Max had been restless during the flight, occasionally rustling around in the satchel, but neither Laura nor had dared to check on him while. Now, as negotiations began, Max remained hidden, curled up in the bottom of the bag, blissfully unaware of the chaos he was about to cause. The 2 ambassadors took their seats at opposite ends of a long table. Between them lay the treaty document, rolled up and tied with a ribbon. It gleamed faintly in the light, its surface imprinted with intricate designs meant to honor both human and traditions. Laura gestured to place the document in the center of the table, where it would remain until the signing ceremony later that day. As the discussions commenced, Laura focused intently on maintaining a professional demeanor. She outlined Earth's proposals, emphasizing mutual cooperation and shared resources. L listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with questions or counterpoints. Despite their differences, there was a flicker of understanding between them, a sense that they both wanted this summit to succeed. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Every word exchanged carried weight, every pause filled with unspoken implications. Laura knew that any misstep could derail the entire process. And then, just as things seemed to be progressing smoothly, disaster struck. From the corner of her eye, Laura noticed movement near the table. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light. Then she saw it again, a small, furry shape darting across the polished surface. Before she could react, the creature leapt onto the treaty itself, sniffing curiously at the rolled-up parchment. "No," Laura gasped, lunging forward. "Max, stop." Her cry startled everyone in the room, including L, whose antennae twitched in alarm. By the time Laura reached the table, It was too late. Max had already sunk his tiny teeth into the document, tearing off a piece and chewing it enthusiastically. Bits of edible paper fluttered to the floor as the cub continued his destructive feast. "What is this?" El demanded, his translator emitting sharp, agitated tones. "It's nothing," Laura stammered, trying desperately to salvage the situation. "Just a minor mishap." Rushed to her side, his face pale. "Oh no," he muttered, "this can't be happening." Ambassador L leaned forward, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "Explain, now." Laura glanced at who nodded grimly. "It's okay," he whispered. "We can fix this." Taking a deep breath, Laura turned back to L. "The treaty, it's printed on edible paper. As a sign of respect for your customs, we thought it appropriate since your people consume documents ceremonially." El stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he made a sound that might have been laughter, a series of rapid clicks that echoed through the room. "Your species finds humor in destruction?" he asked, his tone lighter than before. "No, not at all," Laura assured him. "It's still salvageable. We can reprint it immediately." El tilted his head, considering her words. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but let this serve as a reminder that even the smallest actions can have great consequences." As technicians scrambled to prepare a replacement treaty, Laura couldn't help but glance at Max, who was now sitting innocently on the table, licking his paws. Unaware of the turmoil he had caused, the little cub looked utterly content. Though the incident threatened to derail the summit, it also planted a seed of curiosity in Elle's mind. Perhaps these humans, with their unpredictable pets and strange customs, weren't so different after all. For now, the negotiations would continue, but the memory of Max's antics lingered, a reminder that sometimes the path to peace isn't paved with perfection. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery and the occasional rustle of papers. Laura stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief as Max, her mischievous cub, continued to chew on the Galactic Peace Treaty. Bits of edible paper fluttered to the floor like confetti, scattering around the table. Hovered beside her, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. Across from them, Ambassador L watched the scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "What is this creature?" L asked, his translator device emitting clipped tones that barely concealed his agitation. His forearms twitched, and his antennae quivered as he leaned forward, studying Max with an intensity that made the cub pause mid-chew. Laura stammered, struggling to find the right words. She glanced at who offered no help. "He's my pet," she finally admitted. "A companion." El tilted his head, his large compound eyes narrowing slightly. "Your species allows such distractions during critical negotiations." "It wasn't supposed to happen," Laura said quickly, her voice rising in defense. "He must have snuck into his bag during the journey here. We didn't even know he was aboard." Nodded vigorously, though his expression suggested he was still trying to process what had just occurred. "It's true," he added. "We would never intentionally bring an animal to something as important as this." Max, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, finished chewing the piece of paper in his mouth and hopped down from the table. He padded across the floor, sniffing curiously at Elle's clawed feet. The ambassador stepped back cautiously, his mandibles clicking softly. "Fascinating," Elle murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. He crouched slightly, extending one of his limbs toward Max. The cub sniffed it cautiously before giving it a playful nip. To everyone's surprise, Elle didn't react defensively. Instead, he clicked again, a sound that might have passed for laughter among his kind. Laura exhaled sharply, realizing she had been holding her breath. "I'm so sorry," she said, her tone sincere. "This is embarrassing. I promise it won't happen again." Elle straightened up, his posture relaxing slightly. "Perhaps not," he replied, "but your pet has already caused significant damage. What do you intend to do about the treaty?" stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Actually, sir, there's good news. The treaty was printed on edible paper specifically for your ceremonial traditions. It can be reprinted easily. We'll have a replacement ready within the hour." El stared at for a moment, then turned his gaze back to Laura. "You anticipated our customs well," he said, "but I must admit, I did not expect such creativity in your approach." Laura forced a smile, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. It was meant as a gesture of goodwill. Clearly, we underestimated how much goodwill edible paper could inspire. El's mandibles clicked again, and this time there was no mistaking the amusement in his tone. "Indeed, perhaps your species is more adaptable than we assumed." As technicians were summoned to reprint the treaty, Laura scooped Max into her arms, cradling him gently despite her frustration. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered, half scolding, half affectionate. Max chirped softly, nuzzling against her chest as if to apologize. Watched the exchange with a mix of relief and bewilderment. "Do you think he'll let us off the hook for this?" he asked quietly. "I hope so," Laura replied. "If not, we're in serious trouble." While they waited for the replacement document, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial tension gave way to something unexpected: curiosity. Elle seemed genuinely interested in Max, occasionally glancing at the cub with what appeared to be fascination. Laura noticed this and decided to use it to their advantage. "He's harmless, really," she said, setting Max down on the table once more. "Just curious, sometimes too curious for his own good." Elle observed Max as the cub sniffed at a discarded piece of edible paper. "He reminds me of our hatchlings," the ambassador remarked. "They are small and unpredictable, yet full of energy. They often cause chaos without meaning to." Laura smiled, sensing an opportunity to build rapport. "That sounds familiar. Max has gotten into plenty of trouble over the years, but he always manages to win people over in the end." Elle clicked thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is wisdom in embracing unpredictability. In our empire, order is valued above all else, but perhaps balance is necessary." The conversation flowed more naturally after that. Laura and Elle discussed their respective cultures, sharing anecdotes about their families and traditions. Listened intently, occasionally chiming in with observations of his own. Max, meanwhile, explored every corner of the conference room, drawing smiles even from the usually stoic guards. At one point, Max climbed onto Elle's chair, perching near the ambassador's segmented tail. Elle reached out cautiously, allowing the cub to sniff his limb once more. Max responded by batting playfully at one of Elle's claws, eliciting another round of clicks from the ambassador. "He seems fond of you," Laura noted, amused. "Perhaps," Elle replied, "or perhaps he simply enjoys causing mischief." When the replacement treaty arrived, the mood in the room had changed entirely. What had started as a tense negotiation now felt like a meeting between equals, two civilizations finding common ground through shared experiences. As Laura and Elle reviewed the new document, Max curled up contentedly on the table, his earlier antics forgotten. "Shall we proceed?" Elle asked, gesturing toward the treaty. "Yes," Laura agreed, "and thank you for your understanding. Not many ambassadors would take something like this in stride." Elle inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps it is a sign. Perhaps the galaxy needs reminders that even the smallest actions can lead to meaningful outcomes." With that, the formal discussions resumed. But the incident with Max lingered in everyone's minds, serving as a reminder that diplomacy wasn't just about treaties and agreements. It was also about connection, adaptability, and sometimes a little bit of chaos. As the day wore on, Laura couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The accident had been embarrassing, yes, but it had also opened a door. Maybe, just maybe, humanity and the could find a way to coexist peacefully, not because of perfect planning, but because of moments like these, where imperfection brought them closer together. And somewhere in the corner of the room, Max slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the role he had played in bridging two very different worlds. The incident with Max had shifted something in the air. What began as a tense standoff between Earth and the Empire now felt less like a negotiation and more like an exchange of ideas. Laura sat across from Ambassador L, her posture relaxed but her mind sharp. Hovered nearby, jotting notes and occasionally glancing at Max, who was now curled up on a chair near the table. The cub's earlier antics had caused chaos, but they had also paved the way for something unexpected, a connection. L leaned forward slightly, his chitinous exoskeleton catching the light as he adjusted his position. "Your species values companionship," he said, his translator device rendering his words into smooth, measured tones. "Even creatures as small as your pet play a role in your lives." Laura nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, they do. Pets like Max aren't just animals to us, they're family. They bring joy, comfort, and sometimes even lessons we didn't know we needed." El tilted his head, his antennae twitching slightly. "Family, that is a concept we understand differently. In our empire, bonds are formed through purpose and duty. Emotional attachments are rare, reserved only for those who serve vital roles." "That sounds lonely," Laura admitted, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to offend, but she couldn't help feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of such detachment. "Don't you ever wish for something more, something beyond duty?" The ambassador paused, his large compound eyes fixed on her. For a moment he seemed lost in thought. Then he clicked softly, a sound that had become familiar over the past few hours. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but such desires are seen as weaknesses. To care deeply is to risk distraction." "Not always," Laura countered gently. "Sometimes caring deeply gives us strength. It reminds us what we're fighting for, or in this case, what we're working toward." El considered her words, his mandibles clicking again. He glanced at Max, who had woken up and was now stretching lazily, his tiny claws gripping the edge of the chair. "Your cub has certainly been distracting, yet I find myself intrigued by him." Laura chuckled softly. "That's Max for you. He has a way of winning people over, even when he's causing trouble." Sensing the shift in tone, decided to join the conversation. "It's funny, isn't it? Something so small can make such a big impact. Maybe that's why humans keep pets. They remind us that life isn't just about rules and responsibilities. Sometimes it's about moments of joy." El's antennae quivered slightly and he turned his gaze to joy, another concept we interpret differently. For us, fulfillment comes from achieving objectives, not fleeting emotions. "But don't those emotions fuel you?" pressed. "I mean, if you're passionate about something, doesn't it make you work harder? Isn't that part of what drives progress?" The ambassador hesitated, his forearms resting lightly on the table. "Passion can be dangerous. It clouds judgment, leads to rash decisions. Our society thrives on logic and order." "Order is important," Laura agreed. "But balance is too. Imagine if every decision you made was purely logical, without any room for creativity or emotion. Wouldn't that limit your potential?" El clicked again, this time more thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is merit in your perspective. Balance, it is a delicate thing to achieve." As the discussion continued, the atmosphere grew lighter. Gone were the rigid formalities of earlier. Instead, the conversation flowed naturally, almost like a dialogue between old friends. Laura noticed how El's demeanor softened whenever he looked at Max. The cub, oblivious to his newfound role as a diplomatic bridge, wandered around the room, occasionally stopping to sniff at El's claws or investigate a stray piece of edible paper. At one point, Max climbed onto the table, nudging the treaty document with his nose. Laura tensed, worried he might try to chew on it again, but El simply extended a limb, allowing the cub to sniff it curiously. Max chirped softly before hopping back down, content to explore elsewhere. "You seem fond of him," Laura remarked, watching the interaction closely. "He is unusual," El replied. "Unpredictable yet harmless. Perhaps that is why he fascinates me. He's full of surprises, Laura agreed. Just like humans in a way, we're not perfect and we don't always follow the rules, but we adapt. We learn. And sometimes our mistakes lead to something better. Elle clicked softly, his expression unreadable behind his features. An interesting philosophy, one I will consider. The conversation eventually circled back to the treaty. Both sides reviewed its terms carefully, discussing areas where compromises could be made. Laura proposed adding a clause about cultural exchange programs, allowing humans to visit each other's worlds and share knowledge. Elle listened intently, his antennae twitching as he processed the idea. This could foster understanding, he said after a moment, but it would require trust, trust that both sides will honor their commitments. We're willing to take that step, Laura assured him, aren't you? Elle hesitated, then nodded slowly. Very well, let us include this provision, but let it be known that any breach of trust will not go unanswered. Understood, Laura replied, and the same goes for us. As the negotiations progressed, Max continued to weave his way into the hearts of everyone present. Even the guards, who had initially regarded him with suspicion, began to relax in his presence. One of them even offered him a small piece of edible paper, which Max eagerly accepted, chewing it with obvious delight. Leaned over to Laura during a break and whispered, "Do you think we're getting through to them?" "I think so," Laura replied quietly. "Max may have started it, but the rest is up to us. If we can show them that we're not so different after all, maybe we can build something real here." When the session ended for the day, Elle stood and bowed slightly, an uncharacteristic gesture that caught Laura off guard. "Thank you, Ambassador," he said. "Today has been enlightening." "The feeling is mutual," Laura replied, returning the bow. "And thank you for your patience with everything." As they parted ways, Laura couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. The treaty was far from finalized, but the foundation for peace was growing stronger with each passing hour. And while Max's antics had nearly derailed the summit, they had also created a bond that words alone might never have achieved. Back in her quarters, Laura settled onto the couch, Max curling up beside her. She scratched behind his ears absent-mindedly, smiling to herself. "You're quite the diplomat, aren't you?" she murmured. Max chirped softly, closing his eyes as he drifted off to sleep. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly against the endless void of space, a reminder that even in the vastness of the galaxy, connections could form in the most unexpected ways. For now, the road ahead remained uncertain, but thanks to a curious little cub and the bridges he had built, hope burned brighter than ever. The next morning, Laura woke up feeling lighter than she had in days. The weight of the summit still pressed on her shoulders, but there was a newfound optimism in the air. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple yet professional outfit, and made her way to the conference room. Max trotted happily beside her, his tail swishing as he explored every corner of the space station they passed. When she arrived, Ambassador Elle was already seated at the table, his posture relaxed compared to the rigid formality of previous days. He greeted her with a slight nod, his mandibles clicking softly, a sound that now felt almost friendly. "Ambassador," he said, "I trust you rested well." "I did, thank you," Laura replied, smiling. "And you?" "Sufficiently," Elle answered. His gaze flickered briefly to Max, who had jumped onto the table and was sniffing curiously at a stack of papers. "Your companion seems energetic today." "That's putting it mildly," Laura said with a laugh. "He gets restless if he doesn't have enough to explore." Elle clicked thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should find him a task. Idle energy often leads to mischief." Laura raised an eyebrow, amused by the suggestion. "What did you have in mind? Diplomatic assistant?" Elle tilted his head, considering the idea more seriously than Laura expected. "Why not? He has already proven himself capable of breaking barriers, literally and figuratively." The comment drew a chuckle from who entered the room carrying a folder of updated treaty drafts. "If Max becomes a diplomat, I'm signing up for early retirement," he joked, earning a grin from Laura. As the day's negotiations began, the atmosphere was markedly different. The tension that had once filled the room had softened, replaced by a sense of collaboration. Both sides worked through the remaining clauses of the treaty, addressing concerns and finding compromises where necessary. Laura noticed how Elle seemed more open to suggestions, his responses less guarded than before. At one point, the discussion turned to trade agreements. Earth proposed sharing agricultural technology with the, hoping it would help them cultivate crops in their harsh environments. Elle listened carefully, then asked a question that surprised everyone. "Would this technology allow us to grow food suitable for creatures like your cub?" he asked, gesturing toward Max. Laura blinked, caught off guard by the inquiry. "Well, yes, I suppose it could, but why do you ask?" Elle hesitated, his antennae twitching slightly. "Our hatchlings require sustenance during their early stages of development. If your methods are adaptable, they might benefit our young as well." The room fell silent for a moment. Laura exchanged a glance with who looked equally stunned. This was uncharted territory. Elle was showing vulnerability, hinting at a need within his own society. "That's an interesting idea," Laura said finally. "We'd be happy to explore it further. Perhaps we can include a research partnership in the treaty, a joint effort to adapt our technologies for mutual benefit." Elle nodded slowly. "A worthy proposal, let us proceed." The conversation continued, branching into new areas neither side had anticipated. They discussed educational exchanges, scientific collaborations, and even artistic projects that could highlight the strengths of both civilizations. Each topic brought them closer, building a framework for a relationship based not just on survival, but on shared growth. Throughout the day, Max remained a constant presence. He wandered freely around the room, drawing smiles from everyone, even the guards, who now seemed almost fond of the little cub. At one point, Max climbed onto Elle's chair and curled up near the ambassador's segmented tail. To Laura's surprise, Elle didn't move him. Instead, he extended a clawed limb, allowing Max to sniff it before settling back down. Leaned over to Laura during a break and whispered, "Do you think he's softening? Or is it just Max working his magic?" "Maybe both," Laura replied quietly. "Max broke the ice, but Elle is choosing to keep the door open. That says a lot about him." As the hours passed, the treaty began to take shape. It was no longer just a document meant to prevent war. It was becoming a blueprint for cooperation. Laura felt a swell of pride as she realized how far they had come, from mistrust and hostility to genuine understanding. By late afternoon, the final draft was ready. Both ambassadors reviewed it together, line by line, ensuring every detail aligned with their goals. When they reached the cultural exchange clause, Elle paused, his compound eyes narrowing slightly. "This provision," he said, pointing to the section, "it speaks of sharing traditions. What does your species value most in such exchanges?" Laura thought for a moment before answering. "Connection. Learning about each other's stories, customs, and ways of life helps us see past our differences. It reminds us that we're all part of something bigger, the same galaxy, the same future." Elle clicked softly, his expression unreadable. "A noble sentiment, we shall honor it." With that, the treaty was complete. Laura and Elle exchanged satisfied nods, their mutual respect evident in their expressions. As technicians prepared the ceremonial copies, Laura couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since the summit began. That evening, a small gathering was held to celebrate the progress made. Representatives from both sides mingled, exchanging pleasantries and sharing stories. Max, of course, was the star of the event. He darted between guests, his playful antics drawing laughter and admiration. Even Elle joined in, offering Max a piece of edible paper as a treat. The cub accepted it eagerly, chirping happily as he chewed. Laura watched the scene unfold with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "Who would have thought," she murmured too, "that a little cub could change the course of galactic history?" Smiled, shaking his head. "Sometimes it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference." As the celebration wound down, Elle approached Laura one last time. "Ambassador," he said, his tone formal but warm, "your species has shown remarkable resilience and creativity. I believe our peoples can achieve great things together." "Thank you, Ambassador L," Laura replied. "And thank you for seeing beyond our mistakes. Together we can build something lasting." With that, the two ambassadors shook hands, or rather, Laura extended her hand while L gently touched it with one of his limbs. It was a symbolic gesture, representing unity despite their differences. Later that night, Laura returned to her quarters, exhausted but content. Max curled up beside her, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. She stroked his fur lightly, marveling at the role he had played in bringing peace to the galaxy. "You really are something special," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. Outside, the stars shimmered brightly against the endless expanse of space. For the first time in years, humanity and the Empire stood on the brink of a new era, one defined not by conflict, but by connection. And at the heart of it all was a curious little cub who had reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest actions could lead to the greatest outcomes. The final day of the summit arrived, and the air aboard Orbital Harmony buzzed with quiet anticipation. The treaty was ready to be signed, a document that represented not just the end of hostilities but the beginning of a new chapter for humanity and the Empire. Laura stood outside the conference room, her hands clasped in front of her as she took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. Appeared beside her, holding a folder containing the ceremonial copies of the treaty. "Ready?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement. "As ready as I'll ever be," Laura replied, forcing a smile. She glanced down at Max, who sat at her feet, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Let's hope today goes smoothly." Inside the room, Ambassador L awaited them, flanked by his guards. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, and his posture exuded calm authority. Yet there was something softer in his demeanor now, a hint of warmth that hadn't been there before. As Laura entered, L inclined his head slightly in greeting. "Ambassador," he said, his translator device rendering his words into smooth tones. "Today marks a significant step forward." "It does," Laura agreed, taking her seat across from him. "And I think we can both agree it's been an interesting journey." L clicked softly, a sound that now felt almost like laughter. "Indeed, one I will not soon forget." The signing ceremony began with formalities, speeches from both sides highlighting the importance of cooperation and mutual respect. Laura spoke about the shared future they were building, emphasizing the value of understanding and collaboration. L followed, his words measured but sincere, acknowledging the challenges ahead while expressing hope for what lay beyond them. As the speeches concluded, technicians brought forward the ceremonial copies of the treaty. Each page was printed on edible paper, adorned with intricate designs symbolizing unity between their two civilizations. Laura and Elle exchanged glances before picking up their pens. "This is it," Laura murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She dipped the pen into the inkwell and carefully signed her name, her handwriting steady despite the weight of the moment. Beside her, Elle did the same, his clawed limb leaving precise marks on the parchment. When they finished, the room erupted into applause. Guards clicked their mandibles rhythmically, a gesture of approval, while human delegates clapped enthusiastically. Laura and Elle stood, shaking hands, or rather, touching limbs once more. It was a symbolic act, sealing their commitment to peace. Afterward, Elle approached Laura privately, his movements deliberate but unhurried. "Ambassador," he said, his tone thoughtful, "I wish to present you with something." He held out a small object, a crystal figurine carved in the shape of Max. The details were exquisite, capturing every nuance of the cub's playful expression. Laura accepted it with wide eyes, turning it over in her hands. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." "This represents unity," Elle explained. "Just as your cub brought us together, may our peoples find common ground moving forward." Laura nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I'll treasure it always." As the delegates departed orbital harmony, news of the successful summit spread quickly throughout the galaxy. Reports highlighted the unlikely role Max had played in breaking down barriers between two vastly different species. What could have been a catastrophic failure turned into a story of accidental diplomacy, a reminder that sometimes chaos could pave the way for connection. Back on Earth, Laura found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey had been far from perfect, filled with moments of tension, embarrassment, and uncertainty. But through it all, Max had remained a constant source of joy and, surprisingly, inspiration. "You're quite the hero," Laura said one evening, scratching behind Max's ears as he lounged on her couch. "Who would have thought a little cub could change the course of history?" Max chirped softly, nuzzling against her hand. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly against the night sky, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the infinite possibilities within it. In the weeks that followed, relations between Earth and the Empire continued to improve. Trade agreements were finalized, cultural exchange programs launched, and joint research initiatives began. Humanity and the discovered they had much to learn from each other, and their shared experiences fostered a deeper understanding. Laura often joked about the incident during interviews, recounting how Max had eaten the original treaty. "If anyone asks," she would say with a grin, "just tell them the cub ate the treaty, and turned out it was the best thing that ever happened." But beneath the humor lay a profound truth. Max's antics had reminded everyone that perfection wasn't necessary for progress. Sometimes it was the unexpected moments, the accidents, the missteps, that opened doors no one knew existed. Years later, when historians looked back on the summit, they would speak of it as a turning point in galactic history. And though many details might fade with time, one story would endure. The tale of a curious little cub who ate a peace treaty printed on edible paper, inadvertently sparking a friendship between two civilizations. For Laura, the memory served as a reminder of the power of connection. Whether it came from grand gestures or tiny acts of kindness, it was the bonds people formed that truly mattered. And somewhere in the corner of her quarters, Max slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the legacy he had left behind. Peace, it seemed, had come not through flawless planning but through the chaos of life itself. And in that chaos, humanity and the had found their path forward together.